Joining me in the studio after the break, Mr. Trevor Tough, Outback Grave Markers. And today we're going to be looking at stories and the family stories from Wiluna and Sandstone. If you have any questions, 9484 1927. Curtin Radio. And joining us, like I mentioned to you, Mr. Trevor Tough, Outback Grave Markers, a very busy man. But gee, I tell you, on the road a lot, aren't you? Lucky you're not at the moment, Trev.
We are, that's right. And this, hopefully in the next week or so, the water will go down in the goldfields and we'll be all right.
Yeah, it went right through there, didn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. That's your next trip, is it?
Yes, we're off on Wednesday of next week.
To where?
We start in Sandstone. We're doing the whole of the Sandstone Cemetery, which is 144 graves.
Gosh.
Then out to Nungara, after that up to Wiluna, and after that is Laverton, Menzies, Leonora.
God, you're good.
And a bunch of isolated graves as well.
So I've been, like I was saying to you, I've been watching a little bit of repeats from Four Corners and the Australian stories and that sort of thing. And I just absolutely admire these outback characters that are living and working out there still today. Not the turn of the century, because that was even tougher. But I saw yesterday a woman who has got a business where she takes her crew with her, with the big semi-trailers and all the gear, and they go to the stations and do the...
Yes, they're hawkers. They go and they provide clothing and saddlery.
No, they do the work on the cattle. They identify them and detesticulate them.
I'll keep away
that
from
sort
her.
Of thing. Good point. But they're so good at what... And mostly women are actually carrying out this work. There was one guy with them who was a mechanic. But I go from
he was being very careful.
Good point. Fix that truck.
Yes.
No, they're the people I think that are so interesting. So interesting today. Now, yes, you're right. You're pointing this out to me, Trev. I won't forget, I promise you. I was talking to Pete this morning about about the descendants of these graves that you go out to, and do they ever find out about where you've been and get in touch with you?
Yes, and this is amazing because this morning I had a phone call from a bloke called Ian Tulloch, and we're going out to mark the grave of one of the Tullocks who died back in 1898.
1897.
1897, and he was droving a mob of sheep, and in January, which is the hottest time of the year, and he perished, and so did most of the sheep.
Oh my God.
He had a young Aboriginal lad with him helping him drive these sheep, and he survived. He made it back into the station.
Why would they have been driving the sheep in the heat of that?
I imagine because the sheep ran out of water wherever they were.
On the way.
So they were trying to move them back onto water. Yeah.
They would have to know of water available along the whole trip, and they would have travelled for kilometres, wouldn't they?
Oh, for days and days.
For days and days. The man was only 35.
That's right. And I had a phone call from Wiluna this morning, and this fellow's grandson rang me up and said, I've heard you're going out to mark this grave. What are you going to do with it? And all
How is he the son or the nephew?
Grandson.
Oh, the grandson, of course.
Of this guy, yeah.
So 1897 he passed away.
I'd say Ian must be pretty old as well.
Well, good on you. This is what it's about. It's about recognising the family links that they probably would never have. Did he know that his grandfather was buried there?
Yes.
Oh, he was aware.
He's been looking after the grave since 1945 or something.
And you're going to give them the dignity?
Yep, we'll go and...
Well, that plaque is beautifully done.
Yes, they come up nice.
You've got special press now, haven't you, to do that?
We've got a laser engraver as well. This one's done on a rotary engraver at home. I made this one last Thursday.
Did you? Well, you've got quite a talent, haven't you? Well, Wiluna and Sandstone, and when I mentioned it to Peter, he said, oh my goodness, talk about remoteness.
They are, yes, particularly Wiluna. Once you get out past Wiluna, you're getting into desert country. But we've just made 20 plaques for the graves in the Pioneer Cemetery in Wiluna, and we'll be placing those on our next trip starting next week.
Yeah.
And amongst them is the grave of little Claude Walter Gaffney, and he died of convulsions aged 17 months on the 31st of October 1900. And he was the son of Amy and her husband Walter Gaffney. And Walter worked as the assayer's assistant at Wiluna, so he was in probably a bank where they measured the gold that was being
I was going to
in.
ask you what an assayer's role was. Okay.
And apparently sometime later, Amy and Walter moved from Wiluna to Nungara, where Walter became a night watchman, and with Amy they continued to try for a son. And last week I was making the 33 plaques we'll need at Nungara, and I recognised the name Gaffney, and that showed me that on the 21st of October 1907, which is 7 years after they lost their first son, Amy gave birth to another son, which they again named Walter. But sadly the little boy was premature and did not survive, and poor Amy also died in childbirth on that day.
What a tragedy.
Yes, and I start to recognise names as you go along, and you look back and you can find the whole family.
So the plaque is going to go on to mother's gravesite, or the baby's, or both?
It'll go on to both. Yeah, we've got one for Amy and one for the little Walter.
That is no medical help. What were they doing out there, I wonder? He had a job, obviously, the husband.
He was working as a night watchman at that stage.
Okay, understand. William Wall.
Yeah, William was a miner at Black Range near Sandstone, and he was aged 41, and he was killed on the 13th of May 1907 when a fall of earth in the mine caused him to fall from the ladder in the shaft, and he died of a dislocation of the neck.
Goodness me. No one to help him either.
Well...
But too late.
It was too late. I thought they helped him. Yeah.
Ronald Alexander Robinson.
Roland was the son of Charlotte and Richard Robinson, and Richard was a cooper making beer barrels at the Black Range Brewery, and it gives you an idea how well established the towns were. They had their own breweries, which were pretty popular, I imagine.
I bet.
Anyway, at the age of 13, young Roland was already working as a delivery boy for the brewery, and on the 12th of October 1907, he died when he was jolted from the seat in his cart and fell from the front of the beer cart, and the wheel fatally grazed his chest and head. So young Roland's only 13, hard at work already, and he was killed. See,
once again, when you mention these names, if people hear about you doing these, what you're doing with the grave markings, will they get in touch with you? Do they recognise the names?
And it's great to hear from the families, because they have the family stories and photos and all that we can put on our website.
Website. What's the number? At the address?
www.outbackgraves.org.
Okay, people, I'm sure will find that very interesting. William George Smith.
Right, he was, this is another story of a death caused by falling from a horse-drawn cart, and William George Smith was a single man, aged 24, and he worked as a miner and a wood carter. On the 19th of December 1898, he was killed when he fell from the dray in which he was carting firewood to the Monarch Battery, and the wheel of the dray passed over his head. You don't really want to even think about that.
No.
And in these days of safe cars and seatbelts, it's hard to imagine someone falling from such a slow-moving vehicle. But these accidents, in fact, were quite common. The heavy drays did not have springs, so perhaps William was jolted from the dray, or maybe he fell asleep. That happened.
Same cause of death for the little boy, the 13-year-old.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. William Liddell.
Well, mining accidents were very common in those days, and William Liddell was an unmarried man and a miner at Nungara, and he died following one such accident on the 12th of February 1908. He died of shock from a leg amputation after his leg was crushed between a skip and a beam, and they had to cut it off to get him out. So,
do you get depressed hearing these stories?
No, I'm just pretty confident I'll do it more comfortably than they did.
I guess if you're looking at graves, there is a sad demise for so many people.
I try not to get sad.
No, mind you, they wouldn't have had a lot of medical help out there either.
There were some doctors around, but there was not much they could do in those sort of instances.
Gilbert Walters.
Well, Gilbert was a miner at Davyhurst, and he was working on the cyanide operations. He was aged 54, and he was married to Catherine, and they had 2 children, Marion and Francis. And Gilbert's story is another case of a mine accident. He must have been camped very close to his cyanide operation, and that decision caused his death on the 7th of April 1908, when the slime dump collapsed over Gilbert's tent and buried him. And there were 6 men killed in mine accidents at the Davyhurst mine between May 1904 and April 1909. But the mines just kept going. And
they did, yeah. Cyanide, what would that be used for?
It's for extracting the gold. They crush the ore up, and they run it through a cyanide solution, and that deposits the gold. Yeah.
Working with cyanide would have been a bit of a dangerous thing at any time, I would have thought. The Golden Pole Mine.
Well, this old mine was situated near Davyhurst, and the Golden Pole Mine had been a successful producer of gold. By 1904, it had crushed 8,274 tonnes to recover 12,684 ounces of gold. That's 360 kilograms.
Wow.
In today's money, 750 million or more.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Is there any gold still out there?
Yes. Oh, yes.
You're not going to tell us where it is, are you?
Oh, I'm hopeless at finding it. I find matchbox, the old vest at matchbox tins and sardine tins. That's all.
Right? Interesting.
And so it was discovered in 1906 that gold was going missing from the battery at this Golden Pole mine. And local rumour at the time was that two battery hands were siphoning off the gold and hiding the goods under the floorboards of the billiard room at the Davyhurst Hotel. Good spot, I would imagine. And the gold was then sold to a local bank, with the local mine owner lending his name to the stolen goods so it would not be questioned. So all parties along the line got a cut.
Would have been tempting, wouldn't it?
No doubt the bar manager got his share.
I bet.
So the Golden Pole Mine had a very poor safety record with a number of serious injuries. Patrick McAtamney
yeah.
drowned when the cage fell from the brace into the water at the bottom of the shaft in 1904. Robert Gresson died in 1907 from a fall of earth. James Ryan was blown up by explosives in 1908. And in 1909, the Inspector of Mines closed operations down as a result of ground movement, which is known as creep, which is pretty awful. When you're down there, you can hear it creaking. And that was splitting the timbering like matchsticks, and the upper levels were in danger of complete collapse. And they must have got the mine going again, because in 1911, Mr. T. Williamson died after he entered the workings, which was still full of dust after explosives had gone off. The dust caused difficulty in his breathing, and he suffered a heart attack and died. So the Golden Pole Mine has got quite a list of
So what
casualties.
remains of these mines do you see?
Some of them have been taken over in modern days, and they're great, huge, big open cuts now.
Are they really? And they're still getting gold out of those areas?
Yes, and really old mines like at Gabanintha are now being drilled and about to reopen.
Okay, big companies.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got them. Tom Callaghan and his brother.
Well, this is a good story from Sandstone. We're going up there next week, and in fact we'll be there for Anzac Day. And Thomas John Callaghan was killed on the 17th of October 1939, aged only 25, while he was setting explosives, and they went off. And he's buried in Sandstone's town cemetery. And Tom's grave had a proper concrete surround with iron railings and headstone and all the rest.
Okay.
And his brother Dennis lived on to the age of 74, and he died in Sandstone on the 5th of July 1985, not so long ago. So when Dennis died, they decided to bury him next to his brother, and that seemed a pretty nice idea to put them together. But apparently the two grave diggers found it hard going digging Dennis's grave. So they decided to use a bit of explosive to loosen it up. Can you imagine the conversation?
No.
Well, how much do you reckon? Give it a bit more, yeah?
Oh, very Aussie to say something like that. So what happened then?
Well, the explosion loosened the soil for Dennis all right, but it destroyed his brother Tom's grave, which is a bit spooky considering Tom's cause of death while setting explosives.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Well, thankfully both graves are now repaired and in good order, and incidentally next to them both now is buried Dennis's daughter Margaret, who died aged 40 on the 23rd of June 1986, and no doubt I think they would have dug her grave pretty quietly.
With no more of an incident.
No more explosives.
No, that's, gee whiz, they should be a bit more careful. Thomas O'Brien.
Well, Thomas was a miner and prospector aged 45 who died at Mount Morgans on the 30th of September 1915. And his funeral was arranged for the next day, but it seems that all did not go smoothly. A Morgan's correspondent writes of the scene at the cemetery, and he says, "A funeral took place on the afternoon of the 2nd instant, when the remains of the late Thomas O'Brien were conveyed to the cemetery for burial. On the arrival of the funeral cortege at the cemetery, it was found that a grave was not ready. Those who followed the remains had to get to work and get the grave ready to receive the coffin. It was a most trying time for the deceased man's friends who had to look on and take their turn of work.
Oh, dear.
Surely, says our correspondent, there is some method whereby a catastrophe of this kind can be avoided. I understand the local cemetery is embodied in the Mount Margaret's road boards, and their duty, in my opinion, is to capably carry out same.
I would have thought so, if I could manage it. And finally, Henry John O'Connell.
This is another little story from Mount Morgans, and he was a mine employer who died at the age of 29 from blood poisoning and cardiac failure, and he died on the 8th of February 1907 and was buried the next day on the 9th. And thanks to a correspondent of the day, we have another good description of the funeral event. And it says, the remains of Henry O'Connell, 29, who died in the Morgans General Hospital on Friday morning, were interred in the local cemetery at 10 a.m. on Saturday. A number of the deceased's old workmates followed the body to the churchyard, where the Reverend Dr. Graber of Leonora officiated at the graveside. We hope the recording angel will overlook the fact that there was no name or date of death on the deal box containing the remains.
Oh, goodness.
Those whom he left in the world behind were too poor to bear the expense of 3 penneth of white paint.
Thankfully, things are done a bit differently today, don't you think?
I love the language of the day.
It is. You're right. It's a bit more subtle, isn't it? Now, if people wish to get in touch with you, can they do so?
They can, yes. They can contact us through our website. Or they can phone me.
Okay, outbackgraves.org, or we have your telephone number here. If there's more here, you're pretty flat out, aren't you? I mean, you've got a heap to do.
Yes, we're off for 2 weeks.
Yep.
On next Wednesday of next week. We'll be home for 2 weeks and away again.
Good on you. Great job. Thank you very much, Trevor.
Okay, thanks,
here
Jenny.
You go.
Beneath red soil and spinifex, down winding western trails, lie many untold stories in unmarked outback graves. Tales of lonely travelers, hapless journeys unfulfilled, of folks who sought another life, their lifeblood harshly spilled. Some had died from natural causes, bad weather, despair and thirst. Some from misadventures or circumstances worse. They were pioneers of this country, people young and old, from different lands and cultures, best efforts not resolved.
Now their graves have gone unnoticed and the stories left unheard, till these modern day explorers spread their word about the people of this country, how they lived and how they died, to mark their final resting place where others may have cried.
If you travel through the outback, across winding western trails, look beneath the soil and spinifex at the freshly remarked graves. It is there you'll find the stories of the pioneers of old, of their struggles and their fortunes, no longer left untold.
Now their graves have been noticed and their stories have been heard. These modern day explorers have spread their word about the people of our country, how they lived and how they died, to mark the final place where others may have cried. They've marked the final resting place where others may have cried.
Beneath red soil and spinifex, along winding western trails, lie rich and vibrant stories, marked by friends of Outback Graves.